He was in the hospital for 6 out of the first 8 months of the year, and that's when I stopped acting. He went in the hospital on December 30th, and he died on January 5th.
For years, Gary Sinise gave almost no explanation for why he stepped back from the acting career he had spent decades building. Fans noticed his absence from movie screens, but the actor kept quiet, offering only silence where an explanation should have been. Now, following the devastating loss of his son, Gary has finally shared the full story behind that quiet exit, and it's a story about love, faith, and a family that refused to break under impossible pressure. Most actors walk away from a role the moment filming wraps. They remove the costume, cash the check, and move on to whatever comes next. Gary Sinise never worked that way. One role in particular reshaped the entire direction of his life, pulling him away from the glittering world of Hollywood premieres and turning him into something far more meaningful, a lifelong advocate for wounded veterans and military families across the country. Before any of that, Gary was just a kid from Chicago who fell in love with theater. In the mid-1970s, he and a small group of friends, including a young John Malkovich, started a theater company in the basement of a suburban church. They called it Steppenwolf, and although they had almost no money or resources, they had something more valuable: relentless drive and genuine talent. Gary spent years honing his craft as both an actor and a director, eventually earning a reputation as one of the most respected names in American theater, and that reputation opened doors in Hollywood. Everything changed in 1994 when Gary took on the role of Lieutenant Dan Taylor in Forrest Gump. Playing a Vietnam veteran who loses his legs and, for a time, his will to live, demanded more than technical skill. To prepare, Gary spent weeks speaking with real wounded veterans, listening to their stories of sacrifice and frustration many felt being overlooked by the country they served. Those conversations left a permanent mark on him, and they changed how he saw the world. What made Gary different from most actors is that the connection didn't end when the cameras stopped rolling. Real soldiers started recognizing him on the street and calling out Lieutenant Dan. And instead of brushing off the attention, Gary decided to use it for something bigger than himself. In 2003, he formed the Lieutenant Dan Band, trading his script for a bass guitar and traveling to military bases around the world to perform for active duty troops. It was his way of saying thank you one concert at a time. Eventually, Gary realized that concerts alone weren't enough to make a lasting difference. In 2011, he founded the Gary Sinise Foundation, an organization built to provide long-term support for veterans and their families. Its most well-known initiative, the RISE program, builds mortgage-free, specially designed smart homes for severely wounded service members. These homes include features like automated controls, lowered countertops, and widened doorways, giving injured veterans back a sense of independence and dignity. While Gary spent years building the shield of protection for other families, he had no idea that a crisis was quietly approaching his own front door. By the summer of 2018, from the outside, Gary's life looked as full and successful as ever. He was running his charity, playing shows for troops, and preparing for future film projects. But behind closed doors, his family was about to face 2 devastating medical emergencies within a matter of weeks. In June 2018, Gary's wife of nearly 4 decades, Moira Harris, was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. The family moved quickly, and Moira underwent surgery to remove affected lymph nodes, followed by months of exhausting chemotherapy and radiation treatment. Gary did everything he could to keep life running as normally as possible for their family, even as the emotional weight kept building. Then, in early August 2018, the family received a second blow. Their 27-year-old son, McKenna Max Sinise, went to a doctor after experiencing pain near his tailbone. The diagnosis was chordoma, a rare and slow-growing cancer that forms in the bones of the spine. According to information shared by the Gary Sinise Foundation, chordoma affects roughly 300 people in the United States each year, and there is currently no known cure. In the span of a single summer, Gary went from managing a thriving career in charity to caring for 2 family members battling cancer at the same time. The household transformed almost overnight into a full-time caregiving operation. Gary and his daughters coordinated medical appointments, managed complicated treatment schedules, and tried to hold the family together emotionally while watching 2 people They loved suffer simultaneously. Eventually, Moira's treatment succeeded, and her cancer went into remission, a genuine victory for the family. But that relief was short-lived. A follow-up scan soon revealed that Mac's tumor had begun to spread. Chordoma is a difficult disease to predict. While a majority of cases are treated successfully through surgery, a significant portion return and spread more aggressively. Mac's case fell into that harder category. In September 2018, he underwent a major operation to remove the primary tumor from his spine. Just months later, in February 2019, he needed a second surgery to address a serious infection. By May of that year, scans confirmed that the cancer had returned. In November 2019, Mac faced a third major spinal surgery as doctors worked to control the growing tumors. The physical toll of these repeated surgeries was severe. As the tumors pressed against his spinal cord, Mac gradually lost movement, and the disease eventually left him paralyzed from the chest down. For a young man who had built much of his identity around music and physical creativity, this loss was profound. Yet Mac refused to let his diagnosis define him. He continued working at the Gary Sinise Foundation as assistant manager of education and outreach, and he even helped launch the organization's official podcast, staying connected to the mission his father had built. Mac's Catholic faith became a central source of strength during this period. Rather than becoming resentful or withdrawn, he leaned into prayer and quiet reflection, often comforting the people around him more than seeking comfort for himself. Those close to him described a sense of peace in Mac that seemed to defy his circumstances, and it left a lasting impression on everyone who spent time with him. As Mac's medical needs grew more intense, Gary faced a decision that would define the next chapter of his life: continue building his acting career, or step fully into the role of caretaker and father. After finishing his work on the films I Still Believe and Joe Bell in 2020, Gary quietly stepped away from acting. There was no farewell tour, no press conference, and no public announcement explaining his absence. He simply chose to be present for his family, walking away from major film opportunities because nothing mattered more to him than being there for his son. Gary later described his new role as something like being a family air traffic controller, managing the constant flow of medical appointments, test results, and treatment decisions so that Mac could focus his energy on fighting the disease. It was demanding and relentless work, but Gary carried it without complaint, and the challenges didn't stop there. During the same stretch of years, Gary's father suffered a serious stroke, leaving Gary's mother unable to care for herself alone. Gary found himself managing 3 generations of family crises at once, caring for his ailing parents, while also supporting his wife and son through their health battles. To ease some of this pressure, Gary made the decision in 2021 to relocate his family from California to Nashville, Tennessee. The move brought them closer to a supportive community and reduced the daily stress of life in Los Angeles. For roughly 5.5 years, the Sinise family fought this battle together, holding on to hope through every setback. But by the winter of 2024, Mac's body had endured all it could. On January 5th, 2024, at the age of 33, McKenna Mac Sinise passed away peacefully, surrounded by his family. His long fight with chordoma had finally come to an end. His mother, Moira, who herself had only recently overcome breast cancer, remained by his side throughout his final weeks. For Gary, losing his only son left an enormous void, though there was also a quiet sense of relief in knowing that Mac was no longer suffering. On January 23rd, 2024, the family held a private Catholic funeral service, choosing to grieve away from public attention. Gary kept the news of his son's passing private for nearly 2 months, giving his family space to process their grief without the added pressure of public scrutiny. Then, on February 27, 2024, Gary shared the news publicly for the first time through a heartfelt tribute posted on the Gary Sinise Foundation's website. In it, he described Mac's resilience using an image in the film 1917, comparing his son to a soldier pressing forward through hardship, repeatedly knocked down but always finding the strength to rise again. The response to Gary's tribute was overwhelming. Messages of support poured in from veterans, first responders, and fans who had followed Gary's charitable work for years. The very community he had spent decades serving now rallied around him during his own time of grief. In his message, Gary reflected on how his own experience had given him a deeper understanding of the pain felt by Gold Star families, the parents and spouses of fallen service members he had met throughout his charity work. He acknowledged that he now carried a first-hand understanding of that loss, and he expressed gratitude that Mac's suffering had finally ended. But Mac's story didn't end with his passing. Long before his diagnosis, Mac had been a passionate musician who started playing drums at just 9 years old, later even joining the Lieutenant Dan Band as a substitute drummer alongside his father. He went on to study songwriting and composition at the USC Thornton School of Music. Even after his illness took away his ability to play instruments physically, Mac found new ways to create. He taught himself harmonica, one of the few instruments he could still manage. And when his hands became paralyzed, he used a stylus strapped to his hand to compose music note by note on his laptop, recording voice memos to communicate his ideas to collaborators. In his final months, Mac worked closely with producer Oliver Schnee and members of his father's band to finish an original album called Resurrection and Revival, which was completed the same week he passed away. After his death, while going through his son's computer files, Gary discovered an entire collection of unfinished songs, including a piece called Angel's Theme that Mac had started writing years earlier as a college student. Determined to honor his son's creative legacy, Gary gathered Mac's former classmates, session musicians, and bandmates to complete the unfinished recordings. The follow-up album, Resurrection and Revival, Part 2, was released on November 10th, 2024, which would have been Mac's 34th birthday. As Mac had wished, every dollar of the album's proceeds goes directly to the Gary Sinise Foundation, continuing his support for veterans and first responders even after his passing. Today, in 2026, Gary lives a quieter, more family-centered life in Nashville, far removed from the demands of Hollywood film sets. He spends his time with his wife Moira, his daughters Sophie and Ella, and his grandchildren, finding meaning in the everyday moments of family life rather than the pursuit of another film role. This experience has also deepened his connection to the families he continues to support through his foundation. When Gary meets a Gold Star family today, he no longer needs prepared words of comfort. He understands their loss on a personal level, and that shared experience allows him to offer genuine empathy rather than rehearsed sympathy. Mac's memory continues to shape the work of the Gary Sinise Foundation, which remains as active as ever under Gary's leadership. Gary also continues to perform with the Lieutenant Dan Band, still traveling to military bases to play for active duty service members. Each time he picks up his bass guitar and the drums begin, he feels a connection to his son, who once played those same rhythms beside him. Gary Sinise's story is ultimately not one of tragedy overtaking a family, but a family choosing love and service even in their darkest moments. He didn't allow grief to make him bitter. Instead, he transformed his personal loss into renewed purpose, carrying his son's spirit forward through music, charity, and quiet devotion to the people he loves. It raises a question worth sitting with. If faced with a similar choice between professional success and standing beside your family through their hardest days, would you have the strength to walk away, the way Gary did?